Gambit, a once beloved mode, now a desolate wasteland. Could Bungie have done something about it? Maybe, because after all, we have not seen any new Gambit maps since Season of the Drifter back in early 2019, over 5 years ago. In fact, the closest thing we've had to an update in the past 5 years, other than balancing, was with the Final Shape, where the Cathedral Scars map returned from being vaulted, and the Lucid Hive and Shadow Legion were added to the enemy pool. Something interesting to note is that Bungie actually brought back another Gambit map this year, Hell's Grave, just not in Gambit. They reused it for Episode Revenant's Onslaught Salvation activity. I'm not quite sure why they didn't add it back to Gambit at the same time. They did make some slight changes to it, but nobody would have complained if it was added back in a different state. It's better than not having it at all. So what led to Gambit's fall from grace? There was one fundamental flaw. It was, and still is, incredibly easy to wipe players that are not prepared. And what happens when you wipe an entire team? You gain a lead, and in Gambit, it is incredibly hard to catch up once you fall behind. The match then snowballs, and there is simply nothing you can do unless you pull off a miracle or your team is coordinated, which most aren't. All it takes is one good invader, and your average team is doomed. Bungie has tried to experiment with Gambit, but due to not wanting to direct resources from more important areas of the game, we have only seen changes to the following areas: core activity fundamentals, primeval tuning, invasions, ammo economy, and rewards. We also saw 2 Gambit labs, Invasion Swap and Moat Thief. For those that don't know, Labs is a temporary mode for an activity that's used to trial potential change and get feedback. Invasion Swap made it so that each team triggered each other's invasion portal. They expected this to completely change how and when players decide to deposit and invade, but at least from my experience with match-made teams, there was no deep decision making. This is probably down to the fact that match-made teams rarely communicate, and this was during a time where team chat was disabled by default. Moat Thief on the other hand felt like it had potential. It made it so while a player is invading, they drain a moat from the enemy's bank every second. Sounds good on paper, maybe a little weak, but it would force the invaded team to engage the invader to prevent losing moats. What we didn't know until this lab was active was that you had to be nearby the bank for this to work. In the end, players did not act any differently when invading or being invaded. As you can guess, none of the changes that Bungie made or the Gambit labs really changed the core issue. Invaders are the deciding factor on whether a team wins or loses. Gambit is objectively more PvE than it is PvP. Which is why it's strange that invaders dictate whether a team wins or loses, instead of both sides being equally responsible. But let's take it back to the drawing board. What if Gambit was a week-long event that appeared once or twice during the season and didn't take itself seriously at all? I introduce you to Gambit Rush, name pending. Before stepping foot into Gambit Rush, you have to decide what role you would like to take on. That's right, we'll be bringing back roles from the era of Gambit Prime. For those unaware, Gambit Prime was a mode from Season of the Drifter that is practically identical to the Gambit of today. What really separates the two is that Gambit Prime had 4 roles that players could spec into: Reaper, Collector, Sentry, and Invader. Each role was focused around a specific area of Gambit and gave perks depending on how specced into a role a player was. In Gambit Rush, we are going to consolidate the 4 roles down into the following: Attacker, focused around invading and damaging Primevals; Defender, focused around defeating blockers and invaders; and Sweeper, focused around collecting moats and hunting high-value targets. Like with their predecessors, they each have 4 perks which help to build into their respective jobs. Attacker, marked for moats. The player of the highest amount of moats is marked through walls when invading. Restorative Blow, gain 2 seconds of restoration on player kills when invading. Primeval Slayer, do increased damage against a Primeval. Eyes for Eyes, your team gains a temporary damage buff when returning from an invade based on how many kills you got. Marked for moats will help attackers know who to prioritize when invading. Restorative Blow allows them to continue after securing a kill. Primeval Slayer offers some utility outside of invading, and Eyes for Eyes to help push your team following a successful invade. Defender, amped up, become amplified when a blocker spawns at your bank. Weeping Moats, blockers drop moats upon death. Blocker Buster, do increased damage against blockers and envoys. Solid Moats, nearby moats cannot be picked up by an invader, and when killed by an invader, your moats can only be collected by your team. Amped Up allows defenders to quickly get to their bank when a blocker is summoned. Weeping Moats so they can hit back with a blocker of their own. Blocker Buster will make clearing blockers more easy, and Solid Moats give them a way to prevent invaders from stealing moats, but at the risk of their own life. Sweeper, Multi-Moats. Multi-kills spawn additional moats that only you can collect. Eye for Gold. High-value targets are marked through walls. Wave Crasher, do increased damage against minor combatants. Heavy Moats. Depositing moats grants you and your team a heavy ammo crate that scales depending on how many moats you deposited. Multi-moats allows sweepers to speed up the rate at which they gather moats. Eye for Gold so that they can head straight for the high-value targets. Wave Crusher allows them to clear waves at a faster pace, and Heavy Moats to reward those that bank a high amount of moats at once. So how do you select what perks you have? You'll receive a ghost at the start of the event, which has 3 additional mod slots, 1 for each of our roles. You'll have 4 points to spend in those slots, which will activate perks from the rolls depending on how many points you spend. If you want to unlock the first 3 perks from the defender roll, then you'll need to spend 3 points in that mod slot. You'll then be left with 1 point, which you can use to get the first perk from either the attacker or sweeper roll. The reason we are using a ghost, as opposed to equipping armor, is so that players can freely and easily experiment with perk combinations. If we had armor sets, then players would have to micromanage 15 pieces of armor and completely redo their builds whenever they wanted to change perks. So now it's time for your first game, which starts like any other Gambit match. You'll kill waves of enemies, defend against blockers, and deposit your moats. A pass season or relic will spawn beside you every other time you bank, and what you get depends on how many moats you put in. Once you reach 25 moats, it's time to invade. As an invader, you'll be taking out the competition using a Scorch Cannon instead of your weapons or abilities. This is to allow a healthier invading ecosystem, which is harder to manage when you have an abundance of weapons and abilities to balance. At the start of an invade, you'll be invisible and have a unique buff called Gambit Save. This gives considerable damage resistance for 2 seconds or until you shoot. While I understand that some may find spawn killing invaders an expression of skill, I personally disagree, as it does not promote a very healthy competition when the invader is punished for something they cannot avoid and have no control over. Gambit Save is our solution to that problem. To help balance the odds while invading, invaders will have woven mail for the duration and gain stacks of frost armor depending on how many players are within range. Once any team reaches 50 moats banked, a random player from each team is teleported to a prophecy-like dimension. Players here are equipped with the Aegis relic from the Vault of Glass and are tasked with destroying as many statues as possible, with each statue sending 1 moat directly to the bank. Mixed in are statues of the blockers. These take much more to destroy and send the respective blocker to the enemy team instead of moats to your bank. Taking captains will be perched on the surrounding pillars and fire darkness blasts towards the player. These blasts will send the player back if hit, otherwise players will return to their arena when the time limit is up. This segment will only happen 1 time in a single match, so players will need to decide what's more important, getting closer to their Primeval or slowing down the enemy team. From that point on, Gambit Rush is practically the same as regular Gambit. You'll be able to invade once again at 75 moats, and then each time the enemy team hits the health gates for their Primeval. 2 small changes to the Primeval phase is that envoys will drop moats upon death, and high value targets will continue to spawn. By default, each role can be of use during both the moat and Primeval phase. In the Primeval phase specifically, attackers can damage the Primeval more effectively, blockers can quickly dispatch envoys, and sweepers can supply the team with heavy ammo. So to briefly recap, we have 3 roles that players can build into. Invaders use a Scorch Cannon instead of their regular weapons. At 50 moats banked, 2 random players are teleported to a room of statues, which when destroyed, send moats to your bank or a blocker to the enemy team, and relics spawn every other time you deposit moats. So what would an event be without loot to chase? It would be an event that is not worth doing. But don't worry, I've come up with some guns that I think are worth chasing. Since I'm not an artist, I'll really just be talking about the origin trait, a rundown of the frames and perk pools, and ideas for a Memento. The origin trait for this event is called Recycled Vitality. Killing a full health enemy in a single shot reloads a portion of the magazine. This by itself isn't too strong, but where it shines is in conjunction with some of our perk choices for the event weapons. So what are those choices? We have an arc rocket assisted sidearm, a void precision auto rifle, an arc adaptive grenade launcher, a strand pinpoint slug shotgun, and a solar rapid fire glaive. For the sidearm, column 1 has frenzy, impulse amplifier, demolitionist, stats for all, and reconstruction. Column 2 has chain reaction, explosive light, one for all, multi-kill clip, and offhand strike. This would be the first non-heavy weapon to have explosive light, but I think with a little tuning it could be a very nice perk and thematically works with rocket assisted sidearms. Multi-kill clip also makes use of the origin trait. For the auto rifle, column 1 has dragonfly, repulsor brace, stats for all, rampage, and kill clip. Column 2 has firefly, stabilizing rounds, multi-kill clip, one for all, and onslaught. Again, multi-clip is here and makes use of the origin trait. I would argue that the perk on here is weaker than on the sidearm, so I feel that double damage perks are viable without pushing it to the extreme. For the grenade launcher, column 1 has slide shot, danger zone, chain reaction, full court, and envious arsenal. Column 2 has lasting impression, frenzy, one for all, explosive light, and jolting feedback. Lasting impression has previously only been on rocket launchers, but I think it would be interesting on grenade launchers and would pretty much replace sticky grenades as an actual damage perk. For the shotgun, column 1 has triple tap, lone wolf, discord, rewind rounds, and slice. Column 2 has perpetual motion, redirection, hatchling, tear, and elemental honing. This gun is sort of a jack of all trades. You can take it down a boss damage route with elemental honing, or an ad clear route with discord and redirection / hatchling. Or you could even take it into Crucible with lone wolf and perpetual motion. though there are definitely some better PvP options. And finally for the Glaive, column 1 has Tireless Blade, Replenishing Aegis, Close to Melee, Air Assault, and Disruption Break. Column 2 has Whirlwind Blade, Kill Clip, Melee Momentum, Unstoppable Force, and Deconstruct. By this point, you're probably noticing a pattern. Tireless Blade and Whirlwind Blade, previously only on swords, are on a Glaive. I just really want Glaive melee to be good. That's my reasoning. I realise that these may be a little too good for weapons that will only be available once or twice during the season, but this is only a concept, so I gave myself some leeway. Now let's briefly talk about the Memento before we close out the video. This is a Gambit event, and Gambit is obviously hosted by the Drifter, so I think it would be fitting to base a Memento off the hull, a mysterious 9 related object connected to the back of the Drifter's ship. The colours honestly remind me of those petrol spills on the ground that are rainbow coloured but with like an odd saturation. I think it would be similar to the Envious Touch shader to give a point of reference, but with a focus on the luminescent greens and blues like you can see on the hull. Well, that's it for Gambit Rush.
Ding, 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 ding. Hive, bring a sword.